Welcome to All Things Food, and I'm so excited to have you in my kitchen today because I'm going to share with you a recipe that's famous around the world, and from my understanding it originated here in the state of Mississippi over in Ripley, Mississippi, and the name of it is called Mississippi Pot Roast. It's so simple, the ingredients are so unique. If you try this recipe one time, it will be one of your favorite family recipes to cook time and time again. Welcome to All Things Food with John Woods. I love to cook, but I cook to love. So let's talk food. So I'm going to set my pot roast aside for just a minute over here, and we're going to prep our potatoes and onion. Get it nice and peeled here. You can use a peeler, but I prefer using a good paring knife, which is much quicker for me. And remember, consistency of cutting is consistency in cooking. We want these potatoes to be bite-sized. A little knife here. I'm going to cut it in half. And then instead, I'm not going to cut it again because I want these to be good bite-sized. And then I'm going to just make 1-inch cuts in the potato, cubing these. And that's about the size we have. So we'll do several potatoes and we'll set them aside. And we put it in the cold water so they don't turn brown or oxidize on us. And you can leave them in overnight if you want to, and they'll be just fine, but just make certain that they're completely covered with the cold water. Next, we're going to prep our onion. I'm going to cut off the stem end up. I'm going to trim the stem end off, and then I'm going to peel it. Some people julienne cut these onions. I don't like to do that with a pot roast. I like the bigger chunks. I'm going to cut that in half. I'm going to cut off that root in there and get it out of the way. Then I'm going to take the onion, I'm going to just go right in half there, come back and just do, again, about 1-inch chunks on that. So, cut the root end off, cut it in half lengthwise, come back. And this gives me nice, large, consistent pieces. I just think it makes a better presentation overall and in the pot roast rather than having a julienne cut onion. So there we have the onions, and we'll just set those aside. So now we have our beautiful chuck roast. Notice all that marbling on it, which is going to give us a lot of great flavor. This is about a 3-pound chuck roast. Now, if your family's like my family, you probably need to really do 2 of these because we like not only to eat a lot, but we like leftovers, and there are many wonderful things you can do with the leftovers, including making a big PoBoy, Mississippi PoBoy sandwich or beef stew or whatever you want to do. So here's a question a lot of people have. Do you coat the pot roast in flour and salt and pepper? Now, I know my mother did that, and I know my grandmother did that, and probably generations before that. Sometimes mom is not always right. So I think it's just a matter of opinion. I don't coat mine in the flour. I used to, but it's too easy to burn the flour because flour burns, if I recall, about 350 degrees. And I don't want to worry about burning the flour. And then when I go to caramelize my onions, I'm dealing with burned particles inside the skillet. So we're going to choose not to use the flour. Now, if you want to, you can use the flour, but we're going to set that flour aside. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this pot roast over to the stove, and we're going to sear it. Now, why do we sear a pot roast? Someone says, well, it's to lock in the flavors. It's to lock in the juices. Well, that's not exactly correct. I know we hear that all the time, but you're not locking in the juices into the pot roast when you sear it. And that's been debated for years and years, and I'm inclined to believe that that's really the way it is. But why do we sear the pot roast? Well, one, we want to brown it. We want that good caramelization on the outside of the pot roast, and that caramelization is what produces flavor. So we're adding another layer of flavor whenever we sear the pot roast. So someone said, well, do you sear it on all sides? Someone said, you sear it on 4 sides. Well, actually, if I'm looking at my pot roast correctly, there are 6 sides to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a lot of these videos will say, we'll sear it on 4 sides. We're going to sear it on all 6 sides, but we just want a good caramelization. We want to cook that fat cap if there's any, and this again is going to produce a lot of flavor. So what kind of oil am I using? You know, if you've watched me enough, you know that I'm a great lover of this oil right here, grapeseed oil, which I'm going to use today. But I like that because it has such a high smoke point, and I really don't have to worry about burning anything. So this going over to the stove. I'm already heating my skillet up a little bit, and you want your skillet to be hot before you sear. Don't pour the oil into a cold skillet. Don't put the meat into a cold skillet because you're not going to get a proper sear. So I'm going to pat this dry on all sides, and we're going to take it over there and we're going to sear it in the skillet. So I know some of you are probably asking the question, what about salt and pepper? Well, we do want to go ahead and put the pepper on it, and I have some ground pepper here, and I'm going to put that on there real good because I do want that to sear into the meat. But I'm not going to add any salt because some of the ingredients that we're using today have salt. So we're not going to add any salt to this. So we're going to go ahead and pepper it pretty good. Now you say, will that pepper burn? Absolutely not. It won't burn at all. So we're going to be good there. Now our skillet's heating up. How do I know if it's hot? Well, we're going to do a little test on it. We call that the mercury ball test. Take a little drop of water and splatter into it, and if it forms those that little mercury ball there, it's good and ready to go. So we know it's hot enough. Grab my grapeseed oil over here, or you can use the avocado oil. I do not use olive oil because it has a low smoke point. And use a generous amount of oil, and now it's pretty hot, so I'm going to turn that down a little bit. But use a generous amount of oil. We're going to take this and carefully put it in the skillet away from us. Turn the fan on here. Now, a lot of people have a tendency to want to flip and flop it. They like to turn it for some reason. We're going to let that cook for a few minutes before we even touch it. And if we pull it up and it sticks to the pan, we need to let it cook a little more until the protein releases. It's cooked about 1.5 minutes. Let me just take a little peek here. If it sticks, I'm not going to pick it up. Be very careful doing this. Getting a nice, beautiful sear on it. I'm going to carefully get a hold of it and turn it over. Give it about another 1.5 minutes. Now, if I was using flour on this, I'd have probably burned the flour already, and I really wouldn't have been getting that caramelization into the meat because I would have been cooking the flour rather than the meat. So that's my reason for not doing the flour. Now, this is the tricky part, and you have to be extremely careful here. I'm going to use 2 sets of tongs. I'm going to turn it up on its edge right there. Sear that for probably 30-40 seconds. Turn it again. That looks really good over there. I'm going to turn my heat off for just a second, and I'm going to take this out of the little skillet. And I'm going to put it over here in my large Dutch oven, and I'm going to explain to you why I'm doing that. You'll say, well, why didn't you sear it in the Dutch oven? Well, I'm going to explain to you why, but I'm going to put this over here and let you see. It is so deep, it is very difficult to turn it, and it's very dangerous to do that. So what I do is I put it in a stainless steel skillet that's shallow and do all my searing and caramelization of my onions in that, and then I'll add all this to this pot rather than trying to reach in here and flip it and flop it, because that is very dangerous. So I'm going to just set that aside for a few moments, turn my heat back on over here, and you've got to give this your undivided attention. You cannot walk away from this or you might cause a fire. Now, it looks like I've got a good bit of oil in there still in the bottom of this pan, and look at all that, the sucks in the bottom here. Those are going to produce flavor. We don't want to throw those away. So we're going to take our onions. It's already hot. We're going to add those, and we're going to caramelize those for a few minutes. And again, we're building layers of flavor here. And we don't need to stir these around much. I'm just going to spread them out on the pan there. And we're going to let them cook on a medium heat. Monitor the heat. You must, if you're going to be a good cook, you must learn to monitor the heat. And so we're going to watch that for a few moments. And then we're going to come back with our beef broth and we're going to deglaze the pan. So we're going to pour the beef broth in there and we're going to get all those sucks up off the bottom of that fond, and that'll produce flavor for us. So we'll come back in just a minute. So I think our onions are looking pretty good. I'm going to take some of this beef broth and pour it in there and just deglaze that pan a little bit because I want all that stuff, all that burned stuff off the bottom of the pan. We need that flavor. So we're just going to stir that around until the pan's pretty clean. And we're going to take that and just dump it right on top of the pot roast. And doesn't that look fabulous? So there you have it, your caramelized onions deglazed on top of the pot roast. Now what's next is kind of unique in and of itself, and I'm going to actually pull this back over here so you can see it a little better. So this is kind of where it gets interesting. So I brought this over here so you could see clearly what I'm doing. I have this packet of au jus gravy mix, I believe it's McCormick's. I'm going to pour into it right on top there. Now if you can't find the au jus, I know some people that use this Lipton beefy onion soup or this other onion soup, and I've used it on pot roast before and they're both really good. So if you don't find the au jus gravy mix, just improvise and find something else. Now here's what's really interesting. It gets a little bizarre for some people. It's a package of dry ranch dressing mix. Hidden Valley actually. And we're not talking about ranch dressing, this is the dry mix. And it's going to go in here, and I think I was told that the original recipe had Italian dressing in it, but someone didn't like that tangy taste, and they came up, the lady over in Ripley, Mississippi, whoever you are, thank you for this, came up with this wonderful option. So I'm going to pour that right on top, and then I'm going to add one more bizarre ingredient, and you're going to say I'm crazy, but these are pepperoncinis, and I love these things. And we're going to add those right into the mix here. This is about a half of a jar. I'm actually going to add the juice that's in there as well. Everything's going to go right in there. So probably about a half a jar with a half a jar of juice. So we have all that. And then we have our beef broth or our beef stock, whatever you want to use. And I'm going to pour the remaining, you know, I use some of this to deglaze the onions. I'm going to pour the remainder of this. So this is 4 cups or a quart of beef broth. And we're going to pour that in here. And this should be actually enough broth without having to add more later in the cooking process. If this is going to cook down, it's going to make a nice, rich, thick gravy. But you will need to probably monitor this about halfway through just to make certain you have enough broth. And some of that's going to depend on the temperature that you're cooking. Obviously, if you're cooking at a lower temperature, it's not going to dissipate as much. If you're cooking at a higher temperature, you're going to lose a little more of the broth. So just monitor that. If you have to add more water or whatever, you can certainly do that. So I'm going to take a spoon, stir all this together. We're going to put it in an oven, 350 degrees. Cook it for about 2 hours. We're going to come back, check the tenderness of the roast. And if it's tender, still a little firm, we're going to go ahead and add our carrots and our potatoes to it and cook it for about another hour, and then we're going to come back and have a great, wonderful Mississippi pot roast. So now the moment of truth that we've all been waiting for, the famous Mississippi pot roast. Thank you, Marcia and Marla, the 2 grandmas, for giving me this recipe. And if you haven't seen their channel, we're going to put a link below so you can check them out. They're wonderful, full of personality, and they really cook some great stuff. But come over and let's see how this turned out today. There it is, our Mississippi pot roast. We're going to check those potatoes. They're nice and tender. And look at that nice, rich, thick gravy, and it smells so good, and all those wonderful carrots in there. And then remember those onions that we caramelized right there in the bottom. So this is going to be a really good dish. Now what do I do from here? A lot of people will take a fork and they'll shred it real fine. I don't like to do that really. I'm more traditional when it comes to pot roast. And I'll take my fork and cut it into larger bite-sized pieces. Look how tender that is actually. Just falling apart. And but I like to have nicer little bites about like that. So I'm going to do that with my fork here. So this is the fun part here. I'm going to get my plate, and I'm going to get some of that roast out and put it right over here. Nice big pieces. Some of those potatoes and carrots right there on the side. Find a few carrots and onions there. And this is when I really love being me, because I get to not only cook this food, but I get to taste it. And I'm going to tell you, this smells so fabulous right now. I can hardly wait to try it out. So I promised you this bonus part of the video, and I think this is well worth the price of admission today. We had a little bit of leftover pot roast, and what are we going to do with it? This is going to be so good. We made some creamy horseradish sauce, which is just mayonnaise, and I love Duke's mayonnaise, horseradish, and a little bit of that word Worcestershire, ever what you want to call it. And we're going to spread some generously on this bun, toasted bun here. Then we're going to take some of the shredded pot roast, put it right on there. I think in some places they call this sandwich the debris filled. And we're going to be real generous with that there. And might as well put it all on there. And you can top it with cheese and toast it in the oven. You can add other things to it. You can put caramelized onions on it. If you have some carrots and potatoes left over, stick those, whatever you want to do. And this is going to make a wonderful sandwich. And that's your bonus, your leftover Mississippi pot roast. We just made a Mississippi hoagie sandwich. Isn't that delicious? There you have a Mississippi pot roast. Remember, if you love to cook, you better cook to love. And people will really love this when you share it at your Sunday table this coming week. Join me next week. Subscribe to our channel. Tell your friends about it. Hit the like button down below. It doesn't cost one thing, and I guarantee that this one recipe was well worth waiting for.